Hey guys, what's crackin'? Godsman here, coming at you with another deck profile. This time, it's our boy Greedon. That's right, I did a poll recently asking about which profile y'all prefer to see next, and it was a pretty close battle between Bastion and Greedon. I was expecting Bastion to win, honestly, because I thought he was the more popular one, but I guess y'all prefer the Dark Horses, and it's hard to think of a stronger Dark Horse than something like the Greedster here. So in today's profile, I'm not only going to go over my current deck list for the build, I'll also be discussing potential other choices you can put into it, a little bit of a understanding on the aggro version of Greedon that you can play, and this version, which is more of a mid-range and resource type Greedon build. And if there's anything that you have to offer in terms of advice, criticism, comments, anything you liked about this profile, be sure to let me down in the comments section below. And with that, let's get right into it. Okay, so let's start off with the ride line, as this is a standard deck, and any standard deck is going to have a ride line. Thankfully, we're not going to borrow another ride line. Greedon has a great one. Starting with the starter, this is Desire Devil Taida. Now, for a lot of decks, the starter doesn't necessarily matter, and for others, it does matter. This is one of those ones that's somewhere in between. Technically speaking, yes, Taida is your best choice for your starter, and it's because there is exactly one card that asks for the Desire Devil name. Surprising, right? Despite Desire Devils being so closely linked to Greedon, there's almost nothing that really cares about that name. However, for the one card we are playing, spoiler, it's Kodooku, this name can actually pop up, and so for that fringe benefit alone, he is technically your best starter, although he's not necessary. Moving on to grade 1, we have Desire Devil Gouman. Alright, so Gouman's skill reads that when he's rode upon by Desire Devil Boshokku, G. Willigers, I wonder what the grade 2 ride is, you can reveal a Greedon from your ride deck and draw a card. He also has a secondary skill which allows him to counterblast one when he's sucked up from rearguard into the soul to grant a battle door for the rest of the turn. Now, there's a little bit of digest here, but let me just say straight up, it is a nice ride to just get one of the easiest and purest plus ones out there, a simple draw. And even though it is a cost, it's more of a restriction, really. It just says you have to be playing Greedon in order to get this draw. And I believe it's the only card in this game that references revealing a card specifically from the ride deck, which is quite interesting. However, I digress. The second skill is rather interesting, because at first glance, you would think, oh, okay, it's cool rearguard skill, but, you know, this is in the ride deck. Thing is, there is actually a means of calling this from the soul to the rear guard, and then obviously, as we'll get into, there is a way to put it back into the soul, which is going to be your Vanguard. So it is possible to call on Gouman in order to get this battle door if it is necessary. In most cases, 9 times out of 10, it's not that necessary. Most people have gone with the camp that Gouman's not a main deck worthy card. I've seen some builds that do use it, but for the most part, it's one of the more fringe options. But hey, the fact that it's present in your soul to be used potentially is a good benefit in and of itself. Alright, on for grade 2, we have Desire Devil Boshokku. This guy's pretty neat. So when he's rode upon by Greedon, again being rode upon by a specific unit, you're able to put any card from your hand into your soul to add another copy of Boshokku from the deck to the hand. You may wonder why we do this. The reason being, he has a secondary skill. So in the soul, if you are at 4 or more damage, you can give your Greedon an extra 5k. This effect stacks, so every Boshokku you have in soul is going to give the Greedster 5k as long as you're at limit break. This is pretty good. The fact that it's adding another copy means that this ride deck allows 10k to go to Greedon while you're at 4 or more damage. That is not even including the other copies you may come across. This is pretty important because, as any of you who know the deck will realize, this is very much a Vanguard-centric kind of deck, so giving power to the Greedon is massively important to add to the pressure that the deck provides in its offense. Although some people, I've seen some builds run only like a couple in the main deck, I'm going to be running the maximum, and I'll explain a little bit more as to why that is when I go into the main deck copies, but this is your grade 2 for the right deck. It is what it is. Alright, and now, finally, the one, the only, the greediest of them all, Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon. So, this guy is kind of an interesting Vanguard, because when I first read him, I thought he was ass, but Wow, the devil's in the details, and yes, I did make a pun there. So, reading over his skills, they're both Van Circle. First one being, if your soul has a copy of Greedon, the number of cards it takes for you to lose in the damage zone is 7. You need 7 damage to lose instead of 6. Wow. Yeah, and the second skill is also pretty good. So, auto on Van, at the end of the battle that he attacked, you can Soul Blast 2 and put 4, count them, 4 stand rear guards into the soul in order to restand this Vanguard. Then if you have 10 or more cards in your soul, he gets plus 15,000 power. Yeah, there's a lot to digest with this one. So after a glance, you would look at that restand skill and say, oh my god, this seems atrocious in terms of resources. That's what I thought too at first, right? It's essentially a neg 2 because yes, you do get another twin drive to make up for a couple of the sucks, but then that leaves 2 rear guards that are just pure raw deficit for this attack. And because it is 4 stand rear guards that you're putting into the soul, this specifically means that you're trading a rear guard attack for a Vanguard attack. So, yeah, he's definitely a big eater, but that's the point. He is Greedon after all. Where this skill seems to falter is in the resources, but the resources are not an issue because it's the rear guards that are going to make up for that. When I said before about the devil in the details, I'm going to talk about the desire devils in the details specifically. Yeah, not that funny, but still, anyway, bear with my bad humor. The first skill is also worthy of note because in addition to just being relatively thematically saucy, you know, having 7 cards in the damage zone is a reference to the 7 deadly sins. It's also very relevant in this kind of a deck because now it gives you a few benefits. The obvious one being, oh, well, it takes another damage to lose. That's good for this deck because it doesn't necessarily kill right away. Some people build it to kill right away, but in more mid-range builds, it's good to have the 7th damage as a buffer. But by having the 7th damage, it grants you access to your own extra counterblast, which is really nice because this deck CBs a lot. It also grants you the ability to deny 6 damage heals, which is a very interesting benefit. You can purposely go to 7 so that when you're taking your kill turn, you can ensure that they are going to die unless they hit the defensive OT. So there are just a few ways to look at this continuous skill as being a really cool benefit. You need to look and see another Greedon in order to get it. However, let me bring up dear old Boshokku, right? So the soul ability from before can actually work by taking a copy of Greedon and placing it into the soul from the hand out of Boshokku. So that immediately will give you access to the 7th damage buffer. However, this is a bit of a trade-off because that means you are foregoing a Persona Ride copy, but in exchange, if you can see that you're gonna like take some heat, maybe you went second, that would be a good way to increase your chances of survival. So overall, a pretty solid Vanguard, and he only gets better with a lot of the main deck that comes with him. So going in the main deck, let's just get the obvious out of the way, what every deck profile probably shows you, which is yes, 3 copies of Persona. If you're not playing Favnir or Barrow in some cases, then you're going to see 3 copies of Persona like every time. Yeah, not really much else to explain here other than what I mentioned before, which is that these copies do have the dual utility of you need to see another one in order to get the 7th damage buffer. So it's really important to draw into these at some point. I've seen some Greedon players will mulligan specifically just to hit this card. And you can go for that. It depends on how much you prioritize it, but yeah, it is definitely pretty important. So if you want to prioritize it, I wouldn't be remiss. Okay, and that's the only grade 3 we actually have in this deck, as we're moving on to the grade 2s. So, here's Desire Devil Mucca. Mucca is one of the cornerstones of this deck, and depending on what you do with him, he serves different utilities. So, the first skill is that when he's placed on rear from the hand, as long as your Vanguard is agreed on, you can Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 2 in order to choose any card from your soul and call to the rear guard circle. It's pretty powerful. The second skill is when your Vanguard attacks, if you Persona Road this turn, you choose the Vanguard and it gets plus 5k power. There's a lot going on with this card. So right off the bat, you may look at it and say, oh, well, this is cool. It gives you kind of a plus, but it's very expensive. And you'd be right. But this plus is meaningful in a couple different instances. For one thing, it means that you get to toolbox your soul, where you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. So when I brought up before with Gouman and being able to call him out, this is what I was referring to. Mucca can fetch him from the soul. So that's pretty important. Another benefit to Mucca is that he gives like 5k to your Vanguard every time the Vanguard attacks on a Persona Ride turn. That means that if both of your Muccas are standing up, right, they see the Vanguard swing once. So, Greedon's on Persona, he goes. Now, if you have two Muccas, you're able to give Greedon plus 10k. Maybe he sucks up one of the Muccas and leaves the other. When Greedon swings the second time, he's going to get another 5k. That's significant power buffs. But of course, let's not beat around the bush. The main thing behind what makes Mucca so good is that he combos with another Desire Devil. And so I'm going to be breaking a bit of a rule here, and rather than go through the rest of the grade 2s, I'm going to make an exception and immediately segue into a grade 1, because the interplay between these two cards is massively important. So important, in fact, that it actually leads to a split on how you play the entire deck that is Greedon. So we have Desire Devil Bubetsuu at 4 copies as well, because this guy is probably the MVP of the deck. He has one skill and it's a doozy. So, auto once per turn. When your other rearguard is put into soul, not other rearguard, when your rearguard is put into soul by your Vanguard's ability during your turn, counterblast 1. Choose a card from your hand, call it to an open rear. And if your soul has 10 more cards, draw a card. So, here's the thing. When Bubetsuu doesn't need to be the one sucked up into soul, he can be the one remaining rearguard, or you can just suck him up. However, in either scenario, you counterblast 1 in order to call something from the hand. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because Mucca needs to be placed from the hand in order to call a unit from the soul to the rearguard circle. What this leads to is the ability to call rearguards during the battle phase. This gives you access to more rearguard swings, and it also gives you access to a very wicked play where you can give Greedon the ability to restand twice in a turn. How this works is, if you have access to either 2 Bubetsuu and a Mucca, or alternatively 3 Bubetsuu, you can then, after Greedon's done swinging, let's go over a hypothetical turn actually. So let's just say you had boop, boop, and let's just say you just had other random stuff, right? We'll just use the right deck for reference. So in this thing, you go ahead and you swing twice, you get your twin drive, whatever it may be, right? You just get a couple cards. Now what happens is Greedon's going to activate skill. He'll Soul Blast 2 and then put in 4 stand rearguards. So let's go ahead and just throw in like these 4 here. So Greedon restands. However, now you can use the effect of both of your Bubetsu's in the soul. That means you can counterblast 1, call, and then counterblast 1 again, and then call something else. So we're up to 3 rearguards because you left 1 behind. Mucca can then activate off the call to counterblast 1 for a 3rd time, soul blast a couple cards, and then call something out. So this way, now Greedon has access to 4 rearguards so that when he attacks the 2nd time and is done, boom, suck these 4 up and go for a 3rd time. Yeah, it's definitely a very resource intensive play. You're eating 8 rear guards, you're counterblasting 3, and you will CB3 no matter what to do this play, because whether you have the triple Bubetsuu or double Bubetsuu in the Mucca, they are both just a 3 counterblast play. They each require counterblast. Technically, the Mucca is more resource intensive because it requires a Soul Blast 2 as well. But, you know, the trade-off is that you're not always going to be seeing the triple Bubetsuu, right? So, yeah, that's your triple Greedon attack turn in a nutshell. That's how you achieve it. There are a couple other means of achieving it, one of which I'll go over in the other cards to consider section. But for now, just know that's how you will achieve it in this particular deck list. Do you want to achieve it, though? In most cases, it seems, pun intended, greedy. Instead, what you can simply do is, once you proc the Bubetsuu skill and it goes into Soul, you can just call out a freaking card for an extra attack on the rearguard circle. This is particularly effective when you're on a Persona Ride turn, because then the rearguard's gonna have more power, obviously. If you decided to go even further beyond, if you're calling the Mucca, you don't have to use the Mucca to get a 4th rearguard. If you were just down to a few, just using Mucca's skill will already give you access to another front row rearguard. So at bare minimum, all you need to do is invest 4 rears. If one of them's a Bubetsuu and it gets into a Mucca, then you've got a front row back again. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So that's more of a mid-roll type thing that prioritizes the rearguard offense rather than the Vanguard offense. So it just gives you more versatility. Alright, and so that was Mucca and Bubetsuu, but there's a lot of other Desire Devils to go over here. So back to the grade 2s. Sorry for the rule break and grades. We've got Desire Devil Boshokku, the 3 other copies. So I already explained his skills, but like I promised, I mentioned before I'd explain why I decided to go with the full copies. The reason why is it's almost like as if this deck is cursed, man. When by we, I mean me and my buddy Gearship. If you've been on the channel before, you probably have come across Gearship at least once. So we've been doing a lot of Greedon testing, and it felt as though whenever we were down to 2 Boshokku, our ability to see them decreased significantly. Now, it's beyond just, oh, well, you're 1 less copy, so of course. No, it's beyond that. See, the thing about Boshokku is, as a ride line skill, he only gets it from the deck to the hand, so what happens when you don't have it in deck? I know, it seems kind of preposterous, but there were a significant number of times where either both were drawn into the hand, or one was drawn into the hand and one was damage checked. In those cases, your ride line skill is moot. It's useless. You don't get to add the extra Boshokku, you don't get to put the Greedon into the soul, you don't pass go and collect 200. So that kind of sucks. Of course, you know, it's very tempting to try and cut a Boshokku in order to allow for more deck space, but man, this is not what you cut, dude. I've seen deck lists cut them down to 2, well, 2 in the main deck, but no, just run the full Boshokku. Trust me, it's more worth in the long run. Alright, next up on the list, we've got 3 copies of Desire Devil Kenen. So Kenen, one of the more basic skills in this deck, you counterblast one when he's placed during the main phase to look at the top card and call it to rear circle. At the end of the turn, though, that called unit is retired. It's sort of a Shadow Paladin kind of principle, which is your cards are supposed to be fodder, and if you refuse to fodderize it, well, you don't get to keep this plus. So that's how Kenen works. He can only do this in the main phase, though. So remember, this is not a multi-attack extender. This is just an extra plus to fulfill Greedon's skill easier. It is a CB, but there, of course, you know, you have access to a lot of CB stuff, and the reason being, well, you can have 7 damage, and it's more likely that you're going to be able to heal stuff out once you hit the heal trigger. So that's where the CB is okay. Plus, we have a counter charger we'll go into in a second. But overall, Kenen, just a pretty good card. It's giving you the extra plus that you need in a deck like this, which consumes so many resources. So yeah, it's hard to not run him. I don't run him at full copies, though, because deck ratio is really hard. But if you ran full copies, more power to you. I respect that. The final grade 2 on the docket is 2 copies of Desire Devil Kodooku, because I am a bubble blowing baby. Yeah, so Kodooku's skill is that when he attacks while not boosted, that's important. You can't boost this guy. If your Vanguard's Greedon, you choose up to 4 normal units with Desire Devil in their card names from the drop, and you shuffle them back into the deck. As long as you threw in 4, he gets 10,000 power as well. So remember before when I said there was a card that cared about Desire Devil names? It's him. And his ability, it's pretty obvious what he's here for. It's to keep you from freaking decking out, because oh my god, Greedon loves to eat its cards so much, it decks out like a mother effort. In more aggro based builds, Kodooku is not really ran because you're trying to kill quickly. However, killing quickly is the ideal, but it's not always the real. For reference, in BCS Anaheim, Gear actually brought Greedon to the event, and in a lot of cases, he was actually going to win, right? He only did kind of well, won about half his matches, and in most cases, it was because he decked out. He simply did not have the cards left in deck to finish the job. They were lingering on a little bit more than he anticipated, and that was all she wrote. He ran out of cards. But if it wasn't for that, if he actually had decided to pack the Kodookus like we were thinking, then it's quite likely it would have done much better. So don't underestimate the power of recycling. It's good to have a backup plan. He's only at 2 copies precisely because he is a backup plan. Whenever you see him in the hand, it might be tempting to just fodderize him and don't use the skill, but if you have discipline and you can hold on to him, it might be good, because you never know when a game's going to go a little bit too much longer than you expected. Okay, moving on to the rest of the grade 1s. We have 3 copies of Desire Devil Kuvisgee, aka the Alligator. So, Kuvisgee is a phenomenal newer addition to Greedon that came out in set 6. 2 skills. First one being when he's put into your soul from the rear circle by the ability of Greedon. So specifically by the ability of Greedon, so that other cards like Lukie who have the ability to suck up rears into soul won't be able to get this countercharge. He countercharges. So that's really big. There's a lot of counterblast in this deck, and there are many situations where you will be hungry to hit a Kuvisgee just to make it all manageable. So yeah, he is really important for that alone. But Bushy decided, let's give him another great skill. And that great skill is as follows. Auto on the Soul. When your rear guard is placed by a card's ability, if your Vanguard is Greedon, again, and your damage zone has 4 or more cards, another limit breaker, the called unit gets plus 5k power. So this is a skill that I think I would be willing to bet a lot of Greedon players forget is even there. Most people just think, oh, boop, get countercharged, don't think about it anymore. But that's kind of erroneous. This card is actually a pretty good booster. As we brought up before, there are a few ways to actually proc the 5k skill. Not just from what you'd normally expect, which is Bubetsuu to give power during the battle phase, as well as Mucca calling a thing from during the main phase or the battle phase and giving them power, but even other stuff that you would normally think about. Like for instance, Kenen is calling Kenen is calling by an ability. So yeah, that also counts. So you have multiple different ways to call units by ability, and giving them power is going to be good if you're going to be attacking with them. Now, the power is a little bit of a weird sauce thing because giving it to the rear guard is cool or whatnot, but you're supposed to be fodderizing stand rears, so it's not always applicable. But this is counterbalanced by the fact that this is an entirely free skill and it's not a once per turn. So giving him the power literally has no drawbacks, so you might as well give him power while you can. And that aside, if you're trying to go for a more rearguard centric offense, a la being able to call during battle phase on the Persona ride turn just to get extra attacks with the rear and go for more multi-attack, this is going to be very helpful for that. So stacking up some Kuvisgees in the soul, not a bad idea. Alright, and now kind of a personal favorite of mine, not everyone runs this, 3 copies of Desire Devil Incane. So, yeah, like I said, it's a personal favorite, and here's why. It's for the second skill, but the first skill is placed on rear. If you Persona Road this turn, then he soldiers you 1. Neat. But this second skill is a bit of a doozy. When he's placed from the rear into the soul by the Vanguard's ability specifically, you can counterblast 2 to give the Vanguard 5k and a drive until end of turn. So yeah, that's right, Counterblast 2. That's pretty expensive in a deck that CBs as much as it does. So you're like, ew, Godsman, why are we running this thing? Well, it's because, hey, if you got the CB to spare, that extra drive is going to be really good. That extra drive is an immediate plus back in the most pressuring way that you can, a drive check. It also grants you the ability to get even more pluses if you're going for the insane triple Greedon play. Because if you're going for the triple swing and you give him the drive on the first swing's resolution, that means that the next 2 attacks are going to be with triple drive. So that's an extra plus 2. You're seeing accumulation of 8 drive checks on the turn. But even just 1 of this means you're seeing 5 drive checks. So that is pretty scary as a prospect for the opponent. It's just good pressure. It's an advantage card, of course. CBing 2 for the plus 1 is kind of but it just grants you the most pressure that you can. The 5k also doesn't hurt, of course. And also, remember the soul charge. Most people don't remember to do the soul charge, but the soul charge is kind of neat. After all, not only will you potentially hit 10 with Greedon at some point, and you'll want to soul charge in order to do that, but let's recall that Greedon is soul blasting 2 and Mucca is soul blasting 2, so you might want to not soul blast precious cards, so stuffing up on some soul is a pretty good idea. Finally, we've got a one-of tech for, well, the non-PG main decks, and that's Desire Devil Xitto. Simply put, when he's put into soul from the rear, where have you heard that before? And it's by the Vanguard's ability, again, where have you heard that before? Choose a card from your drop and put in your soul. So yeah, this is pretty cool. And not only is it a plus 1 to the soul, but it also gives you the ability to put in all sorts of neat utility stuff. One of my favorite applications is that you can discard a Greedon, then put it back into soul anyway. Maybe if you healed it out from the damage zone, that'd be good. You can put in other stuff into soul that could be potentially useful. For instance, Alligator here. Kuvisgee can give 5k to stuff as long as he's in the soul, so that's a good thing to happen. Perhaps at some point you need to unfortunately soul blast out stuff like Boshokku. Putting Boshokku back in is a good call. Hell, even putting in stuff like a Bubetsuu just so it can then be toolboxed out by a Mucca. I swear, these two are basically thick as thieves, the strongest duo ever. They always go well together. Then yeah, Xitto can really help you out there. It's only one of copy, a flex spot. You can put a lot of different stuff in for this flex spot, but I thought the opportunity to lend itself to the toolbox of the soul is enough incentive to play at 1. And then lastly, for the normal units, of course, and well, one not so normal unit, we've got our PGs. 3 PG and 1 Elementaria Sanctitude, as per the doctor order. Nothing really to explain here, just standard fare. Okay. Finally, we're moving on to some trigger action. So, we've got not 4, but 8 crit. Would run more if standard format allowed us, but sadly we're reduced down to 8 crit max, so we're gonna run our 8 crit max, right? I'm not playing the effect crits because, well, it's not necessary. The effect crits specifically incentivize putting themselves into soul, so it's like an extra soul. The problem is obvious though. Why are you going to do that in a deck that already puts a lot of its stand rear guards into soul? Your Greedon already fulfills what the effect crit normally do. So why spend the extra money? If anything, these are superior because they have the opportunity to be slightly stronger boosters. So whether you have to call them down from the hand, as unfortunate it is, it's a very big reality of this deck, or if you have to do something a little bit even sadder and call it off top of the deck with Kenen, then yeah, the 5k boost could very nichely be important. It's more important than the effect of the effect crits, I'll tell you that much. So that's why we're running 8 normal crit. Furthermore, we have decided upon the 3 draw triggers. Yeah, 3 effect draw simply because this deck requires pieces in order to function. The more pieces you have, the more you'll be able to maximize on Greedon's benefit and be able to stay in the game. It isn't even just a matter of having sheer advantage, despite the fact that you do want sheer advantage in this deck. It's also being able to see different kinds of cards. After all, sometimes you'll be hitting stuff like, oh, you have a bunch of Incanes, but you can't afford multiples, or you have multiples Kuvisgees, but they're hard once per turn, their effect, and it's kind of lame. So you need to I can't English today. You need to diversify your cast of Desire Devils in order to make the most beautiful and potent Greedon boards. So yeah, 3 Riley, not really much to debate there. And finally, we can go for 4 heal triggers, normal heals. Now, I got flack for this in my Baz video, and I get the sneaking suspicion, I've already mentioned this in a different deck profile, but I'm just going to say here again, me running the 4 normal heals is a personal preference thing. You can run effect heals if you want, including the new effect heals that were just revealed for set 9, which could be pretty good in the early game, right? Or also just in Chronojet format in general. You can go for effect heals. There's nothing wrong with it. I just decided that having the consistent access to 15 is important enough in this deck because stability elements they're essential for Greedon, because without stability elements, you're going to be unable to rely on your offense since the resource consumption is so tumultuous in of itself. So yeah, I just ran for the 4 normal heals. The heal trigger is a very powerful card in this deck, to be honest. It allows you to, keep in the game, of course, but the power of the heal trigger goes beyond because your ability to heal is much more likely than just about any other deck in this game. You see so many drive checks, and this combos well with your ability to be at 7 damage. After all, if you're almost always going to be a higher damage than your opponent, then your chances of healing are maximized, and their chances of healing, by contrast, is minimized. How about that? So that's why we're going to be running the 4 normal heals, and just a little spiel on why heals are important. Finally, Dark States over Trigger. So, a little fun fact, right? Dark States over Trigger, kind of an up and down thing. I can imagine that a tier list and over triggers would say that this one's somewhere in the middle for most people. This over trigger is probably the most devastating in Greedon for exactly the reason you'd expect. Giving 10k and crit to the Vanguard permanently during your turn is going to be really scary when that Vanguard can swing 2, maybe even 3 times in a turn with a bunch of other power and bonuses. Yeah, that's pretty wild. So just giving the extra crit straight onto Greedon at all times? Oh boy, your opponent is going to be sweating bullets, brother. So yeah, this overtrigger is particularly strong in this deck within the Dark State Nation. And that'll do it. So, now let's talk a little bit about some alternatives that you can run in Greedon. So starting with the one I actually have on hand, Dofund. So Desire Devil Dofund, I opted out because not only does he not have shield, being a grade 3 and all, but I also decided that his particular effects just weren't as necessary as what we already have in the deck, although he is still pretty good. He reads that when he's placed on rear from hand, if you have Greedon as a Vanguard, a lot of that going around really, you may soul charge 2. And when he attacks, if you have 2 or more Greedons in the soul, you can counterblast when you give him a crit. So yeah, pretty good rearguard attacker, although you probably won't be using that counterblast for this crit necessarily. That's, again, pun intended, greedy. By comparison, we can use a lot more resource and utility with your counterblast. It's really the Soul Charge 2 that is the big selling point for Dofund. And the Soul Charge 2 is just to fuel your Muccas, as we've been talking about before. Mucca is a Soul Blast 2 in addition to his Counterblast, so that can get kind of tight with the amount of cards you have in Soul, especially since you're also Soul Blasting 2 agreed on as it is. Also, if you're trying to just build up on your Vanguard a lot, hitting the 10 in Soul can be pretty hard, especially if you are using your Muccas. So if you want to make it more feasible, Dofund is definitely the way to go. But again, I'm not really focusing on that aspect. I think Greedon is strong as it is without getting that 15. So it's not really that necessary, in my opinion, to run Dofund, but I've seen a lot of builds run it. Hell, even some will go close to maxing it out. So he is a very worthy card of consideration. Other cards to consider, which I don't have on hand for one reason or another, but will be popped up on the screen right now. First off, let's talk about the new order from set 8, Gratias Gradale. So this card is an order that allows you to activate Persona Ride should you not have ridden that turn. That is pretty good in this deck because what did we mention before about the ride line? That's right. It means that Boshokku is going to be a good goober and throw in your extra Persona copies of Greedon into Soul in order to give Greedon the 7 damage buffer right away. But that means you're foregoing the Persona Rides we talked about before. So Gratias is essentially an extra Persona Ride target in your deck, so you don't feel as bad putting away a Greedon to the Soul. That is, yeah, I mean, that benefit really speaks for itself. On top of that, you don't have any of the normal orders in the deck, so there's no conflict when it comes to activating this order versus any other order. You will always be able to activate it if you see it and meet the requirements, so that's good. Another one to consider is Desire Devil Hiko. So this is a promo. I'm not sure when it came out, but it is a promo. Now, the thing about Hiko is this is definitely a hotly debated card within people who play Greedon. Some people look at it and think, oh my god, this is so great in order to get the extra Greedon attack. Other people look at it and says, yeah, this is kind of pack filler, not gonna lie. Probably, ironically, what promos should be more often than not, rather than deck staples. So here's my spiel on Hiko. Hiko essentially allows you to, when your Vanguard attacks, you can bind a copy of Hiko in order to call another copy from the Soul. So yeah, as long as you have 2 Hikos in the Soul, one of them can bind a copy in order to call the other. Very similar to what the V Dancing Cutlass was like, except it's from the drop zone. So yeah, that is what he does, and obviously it gets you an extra plus. It doesn't even counterblast or soul blast, although it's kind of losing out in 2 soul. But yeah, it gives you an extra plus. It could be a battle phase like extra attacker. It of course can help fuel your Greedon restance. But overall, I'd say that it has one big critical flaw that holds me back from playing it. And it's that it requires you to see multiple Hikos. You need to see 2 Hikos just for one to even be live, and you need to see even more Hikos to get multiples live. So that's not always going to be the case. Desire Devils, because they have basically no need for their name specifically, aside from Kodooku, you can also then imagine that there's no way to search out particular Desire Devils. So it's completely luck of the draw whether they're not going to hit in the Hikus. And hitting just one Hiku sucks because you do nothing with it. It's a completely vanilla card until you see the other Hikus and put them into the Soul. That, yeah, I just feel that is too unstable in this particular deck, and it doesn't really do very well. However, if you're someone who's going for a maximized build of the triple Greedon attack turn, right? Aggro Greedon, as I like to call it. Then Hiku may be more appealing, because then you're just trying to play fast and loose with your resources and go for a very quick blowout sort of turn. Now, I say quick, but it's not very quick building up to that blowout turn, I've noticed. Trying to get the counterblast and the resources, a good setup for it. Yeah, that could take a little bit of time. However, that's the only instance which I would consider Hiku, but even then, it's still a very risque choice. And in more mid-range builds like this one, no, he's not even worth considering, in my opinion. And yeah, that pretty much does it for all the other cards I would like to suggest. Now, you could play a lot of different stuff. Hell, you could even be that guy and play like Brainwash Rollers in this if you want. However, I don't suggest that. I think the Desire Devils as a base already do a lot for the deck, so it's not necessary at all, in my opinion. Ratios are another thing that you can play around with. For instance, I was playing things like 3 Kenen, 3 Kuvisgee, but if you really like those cards, you could bring them to 4 easily, just by reducing down other cards. Building with Greedon is almost an art form, really, because the Desire Devils just benefit from a lot of them being pretty good and fairly relevant. There's even stuff here that I didn't even suggest where you look at it, it's like, wow, I kind of want to test that out anyway. It's that good. The Greedon rearguards really make the deck, in my opinion. So there's a lot of deck testing to be done, and overall this is just a really, really fun deck to play. The ability to just smack on the opponent, see them be nervous when they decide, oh no, should I 2 to pass it and risk the double crit? I mean, hey, let's remember, Greedon won BRO because he's just that pressuring of a Vanguard at one point. Even when Gravidia was running around, he was tearing it up in BRO. So he's doing pretty good. So there is a lot more I would like to say on the deck, but I think this is more or less where I want to stop the deck profile. However, I do have some gameplay footage. I did a remote fight recently that I recorded with him, actually. If you want to see more gameplay footage with him, though, you can request that down in the comment section below. I love playing this deck so much. I'll even post a hypothetical aggro build of Greedon, even if you guys prefer, in the description down below in the video, so you can have access to more than one deck list to play around with. However, because of how tentative card choices are in this deck, feel free to debate me down below with whatever kind of cards that you think should be worthy of consideration, or whatever ratios you think should be changed around. I'm free to talk about this as much as you guys are, because this deck legitimately fascinates me. It went from one of the decks that I crapped on so much due to how, inconsistent and resource heavy I thought it was, into straight up one of my top 5 standard decks, period, right now. I love this dude to death, and I hope that after playing this guy for a bit, you guys will too. And that's going to do it for the deck profile. So if you guys did like this, then I've got plenty of other deck profiles down below. I've been getting more into standard lately, so those are probably going to be the bulwark of the deck profiles that you'll see in recent time and moving forward. Though I also do some V, so perhaps look forward to deck profiles on that and suggest them if you have any you're interested in. That aside, I also have tier lists, top 10 videos, discussion videos, the whole shebang. So there's a lot to go check out, and if you like what you see, perhaps subscribe and leave on the notification bell for the next time that I upload a video. And with that, take care, God bless.